Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, artists, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about the show at our website, stash.norml.org, and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. Visit www.redaphid.com. It's Thursday, March 20th, and it's 4:20 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, and this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash. Remember, marijuana isn't going to re-legalize itself. You can make a difference in the fight to end adult marijuana prohibition. Join up with the talented activists of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws at NORML.org. While you're at it, stop by the Stash blog at stash.norml.org. You can check the links on all of our news stories, download our PodSafe music, read commentary from myself and other marijuana activists, and leave your comments in response. It's the cannabis community's online home at the blog only NORML can deliver. Your daily audio stash blog at stash.norml.org. Now today is Cannabis in the Law Day here at the Stash, and coming up after the news, we speak with Dominic Holden, a member of NORML's board of directors, with a look at upcoming projects for the organization. Then Cannabis Carry takes us out to the land of marijuana tolerance, the Netherlands, for a band called Baseless and their tune, Mary Jane. And to conclude our show, we continue our interview with Kris Krane from Students for Sensible Drug Policy, who tells us of the legal complications for students caught with a little bit of pot. We've got a lot to cover, so sit back and relax with your favorite strain and enjoy your NORML Daily Audio Stash. Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our NORML Daily Audio Stash, Hemp Headlines. Medical marijuana activists get 5 years each. Sacramento, California. An El Dorado County couple were sentenced to 5 years in federal prison Wednesday for growing and selling marijuana, U.S. Attorney McGregor Scott said. Dr. Marion Molly Fry and her husband Dale Schaefer were convicted in August. Fry and Schaefer were charged with growing and selling in their hometown of Cool. They claim they were acting under state law. Schaefer said his wife was targeted by the federal government after she prescribed marijuana to patients under the Compassionate Use Act of 1996. Fry, who was diagnosed with breast cancer, said she used marijuana to treat the side effects that were a result of her chemotherapy sessions. Now keep in mind that during these federal trials, defendants are forbidden from even saying the words medical marijuana. They are not allowed to present the evidence of their medical needs, their patients' medical needs, or the fact that they were dutifully following the laws of California. This is a travesty of justice, and on a personal note, I feel so awful for Dr. Fry. I've met Dr. Fry at a couple of the NORML conferences, and this woman is a champion for our movement and such an angel to the people that need marijuana for medical purposes, and one of our true patriots in this movement. And we're hoping that this is reversed on appeal. Citizens learning about being a DEA agent. from MyFox Los Angeles. The Drug Enforcement Administration wants people to know exactly what it's like to do the dangerous work that agents do every day, so the DEA started the Citizens Academy program.
Rapid gunfire and split-second decisions.
Drop the gun! What? Drop the gun!
These simulated raids.
Hands up! Hands up!
And target practice. Both at the Drug Enforcement Administration's local firing range are part of a class, but it's not for agents.
Our goal is to try to get DEA's name and image and what we do worldwide out to the public.
Using guns with soft practice ammunition, we're supposed to clear these rooms, confronting any bad guy.
Hands up! You're dead.
But the guy I shot had pulled out a telephone, not a gun.
If this were to happen in real life, the headlines in the paper the next day would be police shoot unarmed man while reaching for cell phone.
And promoting that awareness is what the DEA Citizens Academy is all about.
Well, if it's all about putting well-armed federal agents in harm's way, busting in people's homes because they smoke marijuana, and forcing those agents into life or death decisions about whether to shoot that toker who's reaching for a cell phone, then I think that video does a pretty good job of getting the gist of what the DEA does worldwide out to the public. Marijuana vote draws calls for resignation of school district spokesman from the union leader in New Hampshire. Manchester, New Hampshire. Mayor Frank Guinta has asked State Representative David Scannell to resign as spokesman for the Manchester School District after Scannell voted Tuesday to decriminalize possession of small amounts of marijuana. Scannell insisted he will not resign, saying his vote is a form of political speech protected by the U.S. Constitution. He also raised the possibility he would take legal action against the mayor or anyone who tries to strip away his job. In a letter signed yesterday, the mayor said Scannell's vote on the bill, which passed the House but is unlikely to become law, quote, permanently and irrevocably harms Scannell's ability to serve the Manchester schools. The mayor argued Scannell's resignation is necessary to, quote, help restore the integrity of district anti-drug policies. Quote, I'm focusing on the school district, said Guinta, a Republican considering a run for governor. We have drug policies that the district is responsible for adhering to, and the person who is responsible for public relations is taking a completely counter view. I think that is going to impact his credibility with parents and students, end quote. Scannell currently sits on the board of directors for Makin' It Happen, an organization that discourages children from using drugs or alcohol. Well, once again, if we don't arrest and imprison young people for the use of marijuana, if we don't ruin their chances of going to college, and if we don't put up obstacles to gainful employment, and if we don't saddle them with a criminal record for smoking a joint, we send the wrong message. Marijuana's harmful, kids, because if you use it, it'll ruin your chances of going to college, it'll create obstacles to gainful employment, and you could get a criminal record.
Marijuana is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death.
Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind.
If the hideous monster Frankenstein came face to face with the monster of marijuana, he would drop dead from fright.
Continuing from the fallout of that New Hampshire vote for decriminalization, we get this editorial from the union leader, one of the state's large newspapers out there in New Hampshire. And these editorials, they're almost funny in the way that they are just a boilerplate reefer madness that we've read 1,000 times before. So here's the first paragraph here. It says, the State House of Representatives on Tuesday passed a bill that would reduce the penalties on possession of small amounts of marijuana. What were they smoking? I am so tired of hearing the "what were they smoking" line. That's a typical ad hominem attack that equates any rational change in drug policy to the crazed ravings of the intoxicated. What were they smoking? I don't know. What were the editors of the union leader drinking? And what does that have to do with the argument? They continue. The idea was to keep kids who harmlessly toke up from being sent to jail. But kids don't harmlessly toke up. Contrary to propaganda spread by pro-pot groups, marijuana is addictive. Well, yes, nobody has ever said that marijuana is not addictive, but when you look at the studies from the National Institutes of Drug Abuse, they cite that marijuana is about as addictive as caffeine. The editorial continues. Partly because of this, it is a gateway drug to more seriously dangerous narcotics. Tolerance to the effects of marijuana smoking can build up quickly, and kids who no longer get the high they once got often will do more pot or upgrade to stronger drugs. Yeah, except for the Institutes of Medicine that told us back in 1999 that the gateway theory was bogus. And also the statistics that show that very few marijuana smokers ever go on to use any other illicit drugs. Governor John Lynch is right that the bill sends entirely the wrong signal to New Hampshire's youth, and he is right to threaten a veto. Supporters of the bill say young people shouldn't go to prison for simply possessing a joint or two, but police say that doesn't happen. Those kids get fined, and the bigger fish get locked up. Well, that's categorically not true. First of all, there are plenty of people in prison for the possession of marijuana. The ONDCP likes to say that very few are there for possession alone, that there are usually trafficking charges or other charges involved. But that's because it's so easy to add other charges like conspiracy, trafficking, or manufacture to a marijuana case in order to boost the sentence. Furthermore, it's not the incarceration that's necessarily the problem. Young people don't have to be locked up for a marijuana crime in order to lose their financial aid, student housing, and benefits, or certain jobs. And also, let's not forget that most of the bigger fish don't get locked up, and it's the people in the middle and on the bottom of the drug trade that usually end up in prison. The editorial concludes, "This bill would likely lead to more drug use and more drug dealing, and the Senate should kill it at its first opportunity." Yes, except for the statistics that show that we find no difference in drug use or dealing in the states that have decriminalized marijuana compared to the states that haven't decriminalized marijuana. Once again, more reefer madness trying to cloud the issue of decriminalization.
Yeah, this to individuals.
Yeah.
And we just want y'all to know that weed helps, you know what I'm saying? So I just want y'all to stop messing with the people who need it to live. It's helping people out there with cancer, AIDS, you know what I'm saying? So y'all gotta let it be, man. Legalize this.
Legalize it.
Very glad to have with us here at the NORML Daily Audio Stash a good friend of the show and a longtime member and now a member of the board of directors of National NORML, Dominic Holden, who joins us from Seattle, Washington. Dominic, welcome to the show.
Russ, thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
I'm calling in this interview to talk about these new projects that are underway at the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and I was really excited about this project you're talking about. It's in its formative stages now.
We are talking about publishing a resource on the legitimate and verifiable harms of marijuana. You know, the problem that we have right now is that all of our information about drugs essentially comes in two forms. One being that marijuana is always harmful, leads to harder drugs, and therefore justifies the prohibition of marijuana. The other side, which tends to be popular with marijuana aficionados, is that marijuana is good for you. In virtually every circumstance, it's a panacea and healing herb. And there are cases where marijuana is dangerous, and there's cases where marijuana may be good for you. And here we try to separate the meaningful findings and research from the findings that are alarmist or sensational, and simply present people with a trustworthy resource that you're not going to find at, say, the government's anti-drug website, which we trust to be a neutral source of science, but simply isn't available. So instead, NORML is going to put forth this resource for parents, for politicians, for media, and for marijuana users.
Well, this will be excellent, and it'll, of course, be well documented, backed up. I'm sure there'll be links to all sorts of the government's own studies sometimes that help to promote the message that the prohibition of marijuana for responsible adults is far more harmful than the marijuana itself. Now,
Absolutely true.
Now, who is all involved with this project? Is this just inside NORML, correct?
We are starting off with certain members of NORML's board of directors, including Dale Geringer, who is the head of the California chapter of NORML, but we're also working with people who are not on the board. Paul Armentano, our policy analyst and now deputy director of NORML, who has compiled and analyzed hundreds, if not thousands, of studies on marijuana at this point. And also, perhaps the greatest resource to the project is from the University of Washington's School of Sociology. It's Dr. Roger Rossman, who heads up the Marijuana Treatment Project. He has seen firsthand the dependence and the harms caused by marijuana, but despite his background, looking at the harms of marijuana, he too concludes that prohibition is doing nothing to address this problem, is in fact exacerbating the harms of marijuana, and that we need to examine truthfully what we need to know about marijuana, and we need to change the policy so we don't make these problems worse.
Absolutely, and I think it's important how you mentioned the two-pronged approach to this, how people look at marijuana. Of course, a lot of us on our side of drug law reform will see the prohibitionist side and be constantly vigilant against that. But you also mention, the marijuana as panacea side of the argument, and how we need to avoid making our argument look smaller than it is by having these wild-eyed notions of marijuana as this panacea or some sort of a wonder drug, when if we're just honest about what the plant and what the science has shown about it, will be taken much more seriously.
That's true. I mean, there are some very real harms associated with using marijuana. It can damage the lungs and can exacerbate existing conditions with the lungs. It can impair people while driving. It can impair learning. And users need a trustworthy resource so that they can make informed decisions. Parents need to be able to make informed decisions so they are telling their children accurately about the harms of pot. Because in many ways, nothing could be more dangerous than someone dismissing the legitimate harms of marijuana because they've been exaggerated. If you tell young people again and again that marijuana is incredibly dangerous, first off, that creates a cookie jar effect that makes it more tempting. And if furthermore you tell them that it definitely leads to crack, that it definitely leads to psychosis, that it is as dangerous for the lungs as cigarettes, when obviously those claims are not substantiated by the vast majority of science, then a lot of young people will simply dismiss all of the harms of marijuana, and they should not do that. People need to make informed decisions. Parents need to be armed with accurate information, and we need to base our policy on the best scientific data available, not hysteria that is cherry-picked by the White House.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to come off in a way that trivializes our argument by making it seem like it is some sort of panacea or wonder drug. So now the other thing I was wondering about this, you were mentioning, did you mention that there's going to be a website promotion for this?
There is going to be a website for it. This is most likely going to be published on NORML's website, but then it will also be published on a separate website, which will stay true to NORML's interest in marijuana policy reform. But this project is not first and foremost about directing policy, but simply providing information. And I think that what's really important is to keep in mind that we have examples of this from the government. The Office of National Drug Control Policy funds the anti-drug website. And while there are bits of truth in the anti-drug, a lot of it is hysterical. It exaggerates the harms of marijuana. And that's unfortunate because we trust the government to give us balanced and accurate reporting based on the scientific data, in many cases research that they're doing, not to subvert findings which conflict with the government's position. We believe that this should really be presented fairly. And a satellite website, separate from NORML, should draw a stark contrast and illustrate what the government should have been doing all along.
I think that'll be a really useful resource, especially for people that are working with grassroots reform in marijuana laws. I know in covering a lot of these medical marijuana initiatives that come up, I just was recently writing a story on Michigan and reading some of the comments of Michigan lawmakers reciting some of the craziest reefer madness stories about the drug. So this will be great that we'll have a factual resource that people can easily search and be able to find the true information about marijuana. Now, do we have any estimated time at when this website would be launching?
It's hard to say. There are literally thousands of published articles and reports from scientists looking at marijuana. NORML's done a good job of compiling some of these, but we'll have to go through them. This will take considerable amount of time, but I believe that by this fall, we will be able to publish this resource online and begin printing pamphlets we can make available to parents, to the press, to politicians. So hopefully by the time this fall comes around, we'll be ready to put this in the public eye.
Well, that'll be excellent. Of course, we'll keep apprised on that as we go through the months. And, of course, we'll have links to it from our blog at stash.normal.org. We want to thank Dominic Holden from Seattle, Washington, who's a member of the NORML Board of Directors and working on these projects for NORML to get the information out, get the truth out to the people. Dominic, thank you for joining us.
Russ, thank you for having me.
Here at the NORML Daily Audio Stash, we work hard to change our nation's marijuana laws through education and discussion. But we also take the time to relax and unwind with an eclectic mix of pod-safe music from many independent artists. We look for music that speaks to the growing truth about cannabis, or music that speaks to broader themes of freedom, liberty, social justice, equality, and protest. To find out more about the artists and download the music you hear on this podcast, just log on to stash.normal.org. And if you'd like to get your music heard by the online cannabis community, just send us an email at stash@normal.org. All right, welcome to our musical break. We're going to the Netherlands today for today's musical hit. Windmills, Rembrandt, tulips, cheese, and laws that decriminalize smoking herb. Why wouldn't you want to go there? The band is called Baseless, and their mix of influences equals a warm sound with catchy lyrics and Pearl Jam-like riffs. Today's hit, Mary Jane, defines the band's sound and equals a great tune for today's audio stash. For more information about this band, you can visit their webpage at baseless.nl. Now, where are my wooden shoes? And another great tune for the PodSafe Music Network, and you can always find information on our artists at music.podshow.com or download the MP3 from our website at stash.normal.org. This is Baseless and Mary Jane.
Can't live Hi, this is Willie Nelson. Alcohol prohibition didn't work in the 1920s, and marijuana prohibition isn't working today. It's time we stopped arresting responsible marijuana smokers. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
All right, we're happy to have here on the Stash Kris Krane, who's the Executive Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy in Washington, D.C. Check out their website at ssdp.org. It's the place you want to go if you are a college or high school student and you want to know more about drug policy and what you can do to make a positive change. And Kris, thank you for being here on the Stash today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
This was a story that we managed to catch last week on the Stash blog at stash.norml.org. It came from just north of me in Washington State, a decision by their courts that student drug testing, just random drug testing of student athletes was unconstitutional. How will that ruling affect some other states and the student communities therein?
Well, as of right now, it won't affect other states. This is the Washington State Supreme Court, so it'll only affect Washington State. The hope, though, is that other states will take notice and that legal challenges will be brought in other places against the practice of random drug testing in public schools, either for student athletes or for students who participate in extracurricular activities. I think this was a terrific ruling on the part of the Washington State Court. It obviously is contradictory to what the United States Supreme Court has ruled. The United States Supreme Court has ruled on this twice. They've ruled once that it's okay to randomly drug test student athletes, the rationale being that student athletes change in front of one another, so they already have a lower expectation of privacy. And they then ruled a few years later that it was okay to test any student who participates in extracurricular activities. So in Washington State, they no longer can test these students who are participating in extracurricular activities or who are student athletes. And I hope that other states will follow suit and that some other lawsuits will be brought to other state courts, particularly in those states that do have a right to privacy specifically written into their state constitutions. I think that's the big issue here, is that in Washington there is an expectation of privacy. There is a right to privacy in their state constitution. There are a number of states that have this that have that written into their constitutions. The United States Constitution, of course, does not. I hope that other states will follow Washington's lead. I think it's a terrific decision. I think that, at Students for Sensible Drug Policy, we believe that drug testing students is an absolutely wrong-headed approach. It does nothing to reduce youth drug abuse. All it does is break down the bonds of trust that need to exist between students and their teachers and their guidance counselors, so that if they are having issues with drugs or other problems in their lives, they feel that their teachers or mentors are people that they can go to, not somebody that views them as constantly as a suspect and as guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah, this affects the student community in so many ways. I was speaking with students out on the East Coast in a couple of my interviews when they talked about trying to pass 911 Good Samaritan acts on their student campuses, where if students are having some issue with alcohol or drug overdose, that they wouldn't be punished if they were to call 911. Those are just one of the many types of issues that affect students in a way that it might not affect the general population.
That's absolutely right. And actually, I'm glad that you mentioned these Good Samaritan policies. That's an issue that SSDP has really taken the lead on over the last couple of years. SSDP chapters at about 5 different universities right now have gotten their school administrations to adopt these policies, and they really are, just common sense policies that if a student is overdosing on drugs or alcohol, and the reality is about 95% of these cases are alcohol related. There's very few actual fatal drug overdoses on college campuses, but that's not to diminish the need for a Good Samaritan policy that is all encompassing. But no student should ever have to be faced with the choice of of calling for help for a friend who might be dying and risking getting in trouble. They should never have to make that choice of, do I let my friend potentially let my friend die and not get in trouble, or do I call for help and risk getting in trouble? That's not a choice that students should ever have to make. And so I think it's terrific that colleges across the country and SSDP chapters and NORML chapters around the country are getting university administrations to enact policies that essentially don't punish students for the underlying drug offense in the case of a medical emergency.
And one more issue that we should bring up if we're speaking about students and drug policy would have to be what's happening at the federal level. Of course, there's always the Higher Education Act and the penalties that students face upon receiving a drug conviction. What will Students for Sensible Drug Policy be doing this year at the federal level?
Well, this has been probably the busiest year we've ever had at the federal level on this issue. For those who are unaware of the issue, this is we're talking about the Higher Education Act aid elimination penalty, which automatically strips students of their financial aid eligibility if they're convicted of a drug offense. Right now we have bills introduced in both the House and in the Senate. In the House, a bill called the RISE Act, which would repeal this penalty outright. In the Senate, actually just last week, Senator Dodd introduced the first ever Senate bill to get rid of this penalty. It wouldn't actually repeal it outright. What it would do is it would give discretion to judges to revoke financial aid as a condition of sentencing rather than having it be a one-size-fits-all penalty in all cases. It should be noted, too, that judges actually did have this discretion before the aid elimination penalty was adopted, so it would essentially be going back to what we had before this penalty was put in place. And we're very hopeful that one, if not both of those bills, may make it through their respective houses. But our real opportunity to, I think our best opportunity, I should say, to repeal this penalty this year is in the Higher Education Act reauthorization process. The entire Higher Education Act, of which this penalty is simply one line of a 600-page bill, is up for reauthorization. It's already gone through the Senate. It's working its way through the House right now. Unfortunately, it doesn't. The current language does not repeal the penalty. However, there are differences in the House and the Senate bills, and so there will be a conference committee convened of members of both the House and the Senate to reconcile differences between the two bills. And we are very hopeful that this harmful language will be removed from both versions of the bill completely when the conferees meet to reconcile the two versions of the bill. And I actually would say that that's why it's so important that members of Congress hear from people in support of the standalone House and Senate legislation right now, because we're basically using those standalone bills to apply pressure on Congress to let people know that the public is steadfastly opposed to this penalty, so that when they do meet in conference committee, that they get rid of this language once and for all. Yeah, I would strongly encourage anybody who's interested in getting involved and to please send a letter to your member of Congress and to your two senators in support of the RISE Act in the House and Senator Dodd's bill in the Senate. And you can do that on a banner on the front page of SSDP's website. That's schoolsnotprisons.com.
Schoolsnotprisons.com. We'll have a link to that up on the blog for stash.normal.org as well. And of course, the main website for Students for Sensible Drug Policy is ssdp.org. Speaking of schools, not prisons, I'm calling you from Oregon, which is one of 4 states that spends more on prisons than on schools.
That is an absolute tragedy.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do about it, and we can do it if we get your help out there. Just remember, you only need to make 3 phone calls or write three letters. It's 2 senators and 1 member of Congress. You can call the House and the Senate at 202-225-3121. It's really easy. They'll just take your zip code and they'll direct you exactly to who you have to call, and just mention those bills that Kris mentioned. We'll put those up on the website as well. This is Kris Krane, the Executive Director from Students for Sensible Drug Policy in Washington, D.C. Kris, thanks as always for visiting us here on The Stash.
It's always a pleasure being here. I'm happy to come back anytime.
Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. And you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.normal.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave you with today's cannabis quote from Jack Nicholson, actor. Quote, "My point of view, while extremely cogent, is unpopular, that the repressive nature of the legalities vis-a-vis drugs are destroying the legal system and corrupting the police system." End quote. Couldn't say it better, Jack. Thanks for listening to the NORML Daily Audio Stash. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday. And don't forget that Saturday, you'll also get our weekend music audio stash. The past 10 songs from the Daily Audio Stash put together in one podcast so you can jam out on the weekends. I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for listening and take care of each other.